say to you, this is Anagalactic on the first full day of summer, the 22nd day of June in 2026. And over here, you see our mascot who works for free. So that's why good old Luna is the mascot of Anagalactic. She's always up there somewhere. She affects every child who's born into this world that lives long enough to achieve somewhere close to maturity. This is a very strange planet, isn't it? People die at all ages. One of the most tragic things I ever witnessed personally was when I was invited over to a man's house with whom I worked, and I got there and met his wife, and we had dinner together. That was the most depressing, awful evening that I think I've ever spent, because he wanted me to come over in order to unburden himself of the tragedy that had occurred in their life. I don't think I've ever heard such grief expressed. It was quite rude. I really think that nobody should do that to an innocent guest, such as myself, who came over in good faith to just have a good time, talk, whatever we were going to do. What happened was that she had had a miscarriage. She and he both started talking about it. They lost track of my presence. They began to cry, and I finally just had to turn myself off until they were done. After that, I really couldn't relate to the man at work or in any other way. He kept trying to invite me over further. Otherwise, he seemed like a perfectly stable, ordinary man. I wouldn't have gone over to his house. People die at all ages. This couple had been traumatized by a miscarriage. The child had never even come to parturition. The umbilical cord was never snapped because the thing died in the womb. And yet these two were devastated. It was obvious that they were never going to recover. They were reduced to subhuman level for the rest of their lives, as far as I'll ever know, because that kind of behavior is absolutely intolerable between humans. You cannot dump your grief on another person like that. But to extend the story, we all know what we do to each other when we get together to communicate. It's to vent, particularly between family members. But really, it's to vent, to talk about your problems, which you don't want solved. Do I do the same thing? You see, everybody has a blind spot this way. I've been told that I do the same thing. And I have to believe that. It's an objective point of view. We can't analyze everything that we do throughout the day. What does this have to do with science? It has to do with communication. Why do we share scientific knowledge? Is it just to build bombs? Is it just to make more warfare? Now, you know there's a good side. Is it just to make more light bulbs? More Porsches and Volkswagens? What is science for? This is a very important question because it dominates all of life. Not everybody can be a farmer. Where I was raised, which is the west coast of America, in I believe the 3rd century of its independent existence, am I right? 1776, so it's been what? 250 years? I believe so. Why are we here? Is that a scientific question? It had better be. Where do we come from? Is that a scientific question? It has been treated as such. Of course it is. We want to know where everything comes from. Well, we also want to know the purpose. We're humans. We're not AI robots, and we never will be. For the same reason that those AI machines will never be in the remotest sense human. I'm rather perturbed by the way scientific philosophy has gone. As far as my historical analysis has gone, trying to catch up with science, going back through the pages and finding out how science was conducted in the past, rather necessary if you're trying to catch up with the modern database of science. You have to work hard. I've been doing it for 16 years, although that's rather a late start. That's still 16 years, so I have done what I could. Every man has to reach his own conclusions. Why are you studying science? You're not going to church. You're not going to a mosque. You're not going to a temple or a cathedral. You're not dancing around a fire in a loincloth. You're not dropping acid or taking mushrooms or shooting yourself up. You're not going into sensory deprivation or trying to land on the moon or land on Mars. You're trying to be human, for Christ's sake. Well, science is about communication. So I take a very hard line. Every man is a philosopher, whether he wants to be or not. We're not Vulcans. We're not machines. We're not logical creatures. Although, wouldn't you say that it's better to be logical? Yes, but it's superpositional, which is the most important philosophical, scientific concept that's ever been discovered by man. Because it's scientific. It's not about emotion and logic. It's about the relationship between two provinces of a human organism. And when I say organism, I'm not talking about the pumping heart and the structure of the bones and nerves and what goes on in the brain or in the parts of the brain. I'm not talking about the soma. This has to do with the mind-body problem. I'm talking about a human being. There's a reason we say being. A human species? Only an idiot would accept this modern notion, which is a Western European white notion, that human beings are simply another species. That's incorrect, isn't it? You have to think about this and you have to reach the right conclusion. There are some matters in the promulgation of science, the sharing of knowledge between humans is obviously a human operation. We're not machines plugging into each other to serve some higher organ, such as a government. And I think you see where that goes. That is mostly how science is construed these days, and I couldn't help it. I fell into the same trap. I don't think any man in America in the 20th century in which I was born, you don't have a choice. You don't wake up with a free will. You're programmed by your environment, beginning with your parents. And they were programmed before you even got here. So we all get to maturity, just say 13 years old, I believe. well, physical maturity. The transition from an asexual being to a sexual one in a human occurs around the age of 13. So by that age, you're somewhat mature, but it is on a continuum. That's why I brought up the matter of the miscarriage. It's very difficult to even define what we are, is it not? Because a human being can be 1 year old or less, an infant, can be in their teens, which you're undergoing a transition which will tear you in half, or you're a mature person in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s. And then something really magical happens. You die. Isn't that of some importance in any philosophy, worldview, or notion of what we're doing at all? You know, why we do anything? You're only here for a short period of time. Don't you have to fit that into a larger framework? Of course you do. It's obvious that that's the very first thing you have to do. But you're ill-equipped to do so when you're in your teens. I just put it that way. At the very earliest, I would say, although this is kind of random and subjective, but I'm making a point that this is a continuum, but it has stages that are well known. And we as scientists, I consider myself a novice or proselyte scientist. I'm attempting to use rational logic to solve my problems. I consider that paramount. We're not ants. We don't serve a queen or a king. We have no leader. We're every man for himself, but obviously that's not true either. No man makes it alone. For one thing, you can't even enter the world without a mother. Isn't that a fact? Well, it's very hard to correlate all these facts together to come up with a rational worldview. By world, it means your life, where you are. You're in an environment. You were born on Earth. You were born from between the legs of a female that gave birth to you. That's physically how you arrived here. So did I. What do we do then? Well, we're taught how to read and write, really how to walk, how to communicate in whatever language. There are approximately 8,000 languages on Earth, although not all of them are extant. But there are thousands of completely separate languages. And you know, how did that happen? There's never been an answer for that. Nobody in the history of science has ever figured out how languages diversified. But that's just the tip of an iceberg. We even look different from each other. There are at least 4 main classes of human. There are people who have skin that is carmine peach like mine, called white, which is kind of puerile, but to keep it simple, I mean, my phenotype, it's called the phenotype. It's part of the closed locked genome, or genotype is proper. Although that word has changed meaning, I still use it in the correct original use of genotype. There's genotype and phenotype. The genotype of the human race is one locked code, and we're all the same. And within that range of possibility, how can there be a range of possibility if the code is identical? The code structure is identical, and that was proved in the 1970s to the 1980s after the discovery of DNA. We're all the same, exactly the same, no difference. There is no evidence of human speciation anywhere. A change to that code would be speciation, called Darwinian biological evolution by natural selection is tacked on. And the natural selection part refers to an imagination of the human mind that the way that the unalterable code, the immutable code, the code that cannot change, it's absolutely impossible to change that code, or the organism in the next generation will be dead or crippled because you can't change the code. That's been proved. But within the code are what are called alleles. You know, the Mendelevian system, which was discovered before the discovery of DNA, that you can control the range, for instance, in raising peas, which is what Mendeleev did. And he proved that you can phenotypically diversify a species. Humans do the same thing. We have a phenotypical range, whereby a man born in the Congo today or 7,000 years ago will have very tight, kinky hair, extremely dark skin compared with mine, and a whole range of human features that make that man look completely different from myself. Those are called black people. What I'm leading up to is the most important question in science, which is, what the hell are we doing? How do you even begin to answer that? But it is the only question worth answering. All other questions are absolute shit. What makes the quantum entanglement appear to violate relativity? Is that an important question? I've treated it as such, but it has a context. Why do we want to know that? And you can extend this principle. It used to be thought that the sun flies through the sky in a golden chariot. Obviously, it's a god, and therefore the moon must also be a god or goddess, and the whole heavens were populated with gods and goddesses. because it's so obvious, only an idiot would deny it. And then along came some men who knew how to use their rational intellect, really at a very early stage of human development. Well, have you ever studied that? How did we find out that the reason the sun appears to go, let me do this the other way, from east to west, right? It appears every day. It rises in the east and sets in the west. Why does it do that? Because it has tremendous velocity? No. It was very quickly figured out, long before the Greeks. It was figured out that the Earth is a sphere and it rotates on its axis. That's actually been known since the beginning of time, and I can prove that. I already know that you have no idea how I know these things, and perhaps I'm just making them up. Well, every man has to prove what he knows so that other people can know it too. Otherwise, you'd have to believe me, which is the biggest mistake a man can make, is just believe what some other man says because he's smarter, or even because he's older. You should respect your elders. There's an old saying in Japan that if a man is even a day older than you show him respect because he has more experience. And some comedians have actually made some skits about this fact, but let's not go there right now. But we also, humor, we like to have fun, we laugh, we understand what a joke is, it makes us happy. We know very well the difference between happiness and if your wife had a miscarriage, or you're actually that woman and you had a miscarriage, you're dead. You're a burned out cinder. How can that happen? It's because we're very, we have quite a structure. It's possible to traumatize a child. Quite easily, in fact, if the men around that child were diabolical enough, and you know this has been done, you can raise a child such that that child will be permanently disabled psychologically. There have been experiments done at a very early age where, you're learning how to finger paint. You basically have just learned how to, complete your potty training, and now you're in kindergarten or whatever. Some rather ruthless experiments were done in the name of science to see what happens psychologically to a child who is systematically deprived of attention. In other words, the child knows that the other children are getting attention because their questions are answered. The teacher responds to them rationally. Like if you ask for a crayon, the teacher will give you a box of crayons, and then the kid takes a crayon, and all the kids know that this is how it's done. But if you systematically isolate one child, such that every question that the child asks, the teacher responds irrationally, like, can I have a crayon? And the teacher says, just go out the door and down the hall, it's to the right. That child will actually go psychotic. That child will be crippled because it was deprived of love. That's a form of love. A child doesn't know the difference between attention and love. To a young human, attention is love, because that's what you crave because you're trying to grow. It's a natural gradient to try to learn to walk right, talk right, dress, groom, brush your teeth, do all your potty, your shower. You have to learn the rules of life. We get used to it. We don't fight it. This is true of billions of humans. I'm just not making this up like some philosophical, trying to invent something. We have to grow as humans. As humans. So let me ask you a tough question. Why do we share scientific knowledge, and why do we get pleasure out of it? I do. I assume you're listening to this station because you get pleasure out of using your rational logical system to figure out problems. But are you just doing puzzles like a crossword puzzle? And when you're done, what's your net gain? Remember, you're going to die. I know this is such a fucking sensitive issue. But you are gonna die. Now you have an emotional reaction to that. We've all had to face that. Woody Allen, the trapped New York Jew, he made a persona out of that was hilarious. So humor helps us. I know I'm going in a lot of different directions, but the question I'm asking is, where do we come from? Do you know why that's so important for a human to know? Not just you or me. Where does this come from? The ecology. That's the only right way to approach science at the highest level. As a full-grown man, to do what you're meant to do, under orders from heaven, if you want to put it that way, but you figure out that there is a problem to be solved and you have to solve it before you die. You have to solve it before you die, or you lose the game. However you construe that, that's the game. I say so. That's my platform. And that's why I am now going to reintroduce synthetic idealism. It's a framework for approaching every question in science and in humanity. It's a framework that's different from physicality. Bernardo Kastrup was the genius who came up with this framework, that instead of thinking of everything as being outside of us, as matter, whereas we have a mind, which is something completely separate. And so we're isolated, essentially inside of our skulls. We're looking out. He says it's through an instrument panel. He has an excellent case to make. That actually is a supremely helpful framework. That the way we perceive reality is indirectly. That can be proved. I believe he has proved it. It is an inductive proof, though. It's very difficult to nail this kind of stuff down because there's also the theory of physicality, which has dominated Western science and continues to do so. That is, that we are separate from the world around us because at one time you weren't here. Is that true? That's true. If you're 30 years old, then 100 years ago, you weren't here. In fact, 100 years ago, no human that's alive right now was in the universe. We weren't anywhere. And it goes back to that. Well, if you're dealing with reality, and you don't start with those two facts that are related, that you came out of nothingness. Absolute nothingness. You had no consciousness. You had no reality. There was no you. There was no me. Or there was no I, if you wanted to actually. Nobody says it that way anymore. Language has changed. There was no you or I. 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, we were a dream at the most. Retroactively, you might say, well, since we're all here now, obviously we were somehow in our progenitors. We'll carry that to its logical conclusion. It's actually called a geometric regression. There are about 8 billion people. About 15% of us have this color skin, carmine peach, called white. And about 15%, that is 15% of us, have very much chocolate-colored skin. Where do those people live? They live in Africa and Australia and a little bit into India. The very, very dark-skinned people who have these other physiognomic features, they all live south of the equator. All of them do. Barring, the horror of slavery, where now there is a population of that phenotype of people in the United States. A small percentage, or relatively small percentage, of the population of the United States right now has that color. You should say, really, that phenotype. So I'm somewhat inaccurate in saying that all people of that phenotype live in Africa. But it can be proved that that's where all black people come from. They are all from Africa. You also have to include Australia. And it's hard to say who got where first, but they're all south of the equator. All of them are. None of them are north of the equator. And if you check, you'll see that I'm not quite accurate. In the equatorial band, all the dark-skinned people are south of that band. They're not north of that band. It's relative to where the other people are. There are 4 main groups. This is very important because it goes to deciding where we're from. Because there's 8 billion of us now, but at one time, no matter what your theory of origin of the human race is, at one time there were 2 of us. There was a female and a male. If you believe in the disproved theory of evolution, if you're still that stupid, you still have to say that. You wouldn't say it's Adam and Eve. The whole idea is to get rid of that superstition if you put a motive to that stupid theory. And that makes a war. Is that natural? Of course not. That's not what we're here for, is to fight over the idea of our origins. But it's turned into a war, and it has a very serious history. Because in Europe, at the time of Darwin, Europe had undergone 1,000 years of one of the worst tyrannies and the most long-lived tyrannies that's ever existed on the face of the earth. The reign of the Roman Catholic Church, which was based on a very specific theory of human origin taken from Genesis 1. And now the West has broken the chains of that horror that leads directly to mass murder. So it's all God's fault. And so it's very important to deny the existence of that hideous creation of the human mind. The idea of God. What do you think about that? Okay, what replaced the idea of this malignant God that all the comedians love to make fun of now? God is dead? That's what Nietzsche said. That's fully accepted now. All white scientists now are atheists. Why? Has it been proved that atheism is the correct model of human origin? That we have what? What's the theory? Well, we're descended from the ecology. Okay, let's say that that's true, that we speciated, that there was a pre-human, and there were no humans, and then one day there were humans. Now, no matter how that might rub you or just burn your fanny, there's no way around that, whether it's speciation or not, because we know how humans are born. You need a male and a female to conjugate so that the male and female gamete can unify, then the DNA rewinds and the gestation of a new human organism begins. Those are the birds and the bees, darling. You can't get around that. Whether you believe in atheist evolution or you believe in Roman Catholic Genesis, Judeo-Christian superstition. It's one or the other, but not in this case. In this case, you're simply using rational logic to figure out what are the facts. Where do humans originate? Going back in time. Well, it's either by the divine fiat of this malignant being who's obviously here to torture everybody, or we're from dirt. And what if it's true that we are from dirt? It used to be said that we're from monkeys, which is, the Islam people actually can't stomach that. The idea of natural selection, for most Islam people, of which currently there are 2 billion, by the way, can't stand that. They will not accept that for a very good reason. It degrades the idea of what a human actually is, so that you're no longer human. So this phenomenon of a human, you, me, our parents, the people around us, of all phenotypes, of which there are 4 main ones, and I'm getting to that. Where the devil, or where the hell, or where in God's name, or where in heaven's name, or where in any form of logic, if your child asks you someday, you have to just envision this. I don't have any children, but I can imagine this happening. I do have students, or in one context, in one phase of my life, I had students who might be expected to answer, to ask this question and get an answer, because I'm supposed to be the teacher. What would I say? Teacher, where are we from? What does it mean to be human? Where do we come from? I might even suggest that. If the question is, what are we? What are we doing? What does it mean to be human? What's our future? Something like that. My response would be, do you know where you're from? Because you can get evidence at the very least of where we're from. Well, we know how each generation comes into existence. It's the same as for all the other cellular creatures. There's a footnote to that. But of the 2 million species of Earth, that's how it's all sexual. It's all sexual. Now, the single-celled organisms, and there's a couple of interesting, I'll just say it's not exactly sexual. But that's just part of the diversity of the skein of life. The ecology is quite complex, nobody denies that. With 2 million species, there are about 1 million completely locked codes of animals, where this kind of fox and this other kind of fox cannot interbreed. That's what it means to be a species. You have to breed a female and a male of that species. That's what a species is. Now, there's also a footnote to that. You may have heard of the mule, which is not a donkey and it's not a horse, but it's sterile. And if you ever have seen a mule, that mule cannot procreate. So there are some exceptions, but it's 1 in a million, literally 1 in a million, or 2 or 3, but the ratio is extreme. No, we all conjugate sexually. Okay? I hope that doesn't make you start rolling up spitballs and interrupting the professor because you're sexually aroused because you're a fucking pervert and can't think straight. No, you have to look at this logically. So there was a male and a female that began the human race. No matter whether you believe in the Bible or you believe in Darwin, makes no difference in this case. There had to be a male and a female. Do you see a problem now? You should. Or you can't think straight. And I'll hold you to that. So there's no such thing as speciation, at least for humans. And this is what I wanted to talk about. What about the animal kingdom? Do you know what Darwin discovered? He discovered what everyone else had already noticed, but nobody had systematized it into a concept, which is, the example I like to use is finches. The finches of the Galapagos Islands. This is an extremely famous example, and it's perfect for this case. So you have, I'll just say about a dozen separately locked codes. So you have finches in the Galapagos Islands, which are an isolated biome. It's way far away from the coast of South America. You could say it's in the middle of the ocean, kind of like the Hawaiian Islands, which also have examples of this. Doesn't it look like all those are finches? Well, Darwin said they all are finches. That's called a genus. And in the genus of finches, the genus finch, there are species. These are separately locked codes. And it's the most natural theory possible to suggest as a hypothesis, if you go back in time, there must have been just one superfinch. The origin of the genus was some bird that carried within its code, which I keep saying it's locked, but Darwin said doesn't look like it was locked in the past. This is the theory of biological evolution. Exactly what I'm saying, so you'll understand it perhaps for the first time in your life. What is it? It's very simple. There are species of finch. Okay? You can extend this all through the animal kingdom. It's the same thing with the plants. They also reproduce sexually. There's a male and a female of every tree, of every flowering plant, everything with a short list of exceptions. It is a remarkable thing to have to say, but I do have to say that. It looks like if you go back in time that there was a superfinch and it diversified. That after one generation, remember, it has to be in a specific generation where the male and the female conjugated in their species. That's what it means. They're capable of conjugation. They're the same species. And they produced one or more offspring that's no longer the same species. It's a new species. You immediately realize there's a problem with that, because you can't just have one. You would have to produce a male and a female. And those would have to then conjugate as a new species. And Darwin said, even though he admitted in his book that he knew his theory was wrong, he said literally, it was bullshit. He only said it once, but it's in the section, the chapter 6, Problems with the Theory. One of the most hotly debated statements of all time. And if you weren't part of that, it's because you're not as old as I am. But in the 1960s and 70s, men would threaten to kill each other over that statement. No, Darwin did not mean that it's bullshit because they believed in Darwin's theory. Well, Darwin did not believe in his theory. So why did he write 2 books on it? One about the descent of species through the animal kingdom, and the second book was on application of the same theory of speciation to man. That's, of course, when the Anglican Church went out of its mind, and if Darwin had lived only 200 years earlier, he would have been captured and he would have been tortured to death, so that the rest of the population of England would never bring that fucking subject up again. Because that's how religion works, right? So that's God's fault. That's exactly what's being said now by the new atheists. So this is a war to the death. Is it necessary? Not if you're a rational logician of my high caliber. You keep it logical. This has nothing to do with the Bible or a church or religion or God or Jesus. It has to do with if you're capable of using your rational mind to answer questions correctly. That's what it means to be a man, is to be able to do that. And since that shows a hierarchy among men, men such as myself who insist on the right answer are targeted by those who want to do things wrong. So I take a harsh, very harsh, fatally harsh, lethally harsh attitude towards men such as Bernardo Kastrup. And there's a list of hundreds of thousands of Bernardo Kastrups. PhD, PhD. Like that means something. You can't even think straight, but you're going to convince anybody stupid enough to listen to you that if you say we're descended from monkeys, then that is the gospel truth. Is that true? That's not science. Somebody has to get it right. Do humans speciate? This is a secondary theorem to Darwin's original theory. I hope I didn't say theorem, theory. In his first book, The Descent of Species is how it's usually abbreviated, he was only talking about animals and plants, which in my opinion is a very good theory. Do finches actually speciate? In other words, did they speciate in the past? Well, it's a very good question to ask. Did they continue to speciate so that we see them speciating today? No. Whatever speciation was for the animals and plants, it's confined to the past. It does not occur now, and it will never occur again. There's no such thing as present-day speciation. If you don't know that, it's because you're not capable of thinking clearly. This is rational logic. This is what we all can share. That's why I seem a little emotional. And that's why I'm constantly raising my voice these days. It has to do with my own perception of my finite amount of time left. I really think that it's very important to get the most important question in science correct. Or what the fuck are you doing if you can't even answer the most important question? Is that what are we doing is just answering a lot of questions leading up to the big answer? No. The question has always been the same. But you can say it in so many ways. But there's a common denominator in all these questions about who we are. I like to start with when. When are we? Well, this is the year 2026 as I'm making this video. Currently, there are 8 billion people, give or take. About 8 billion. In other words, billions. That's an order. There is not just hundreds of millions of us. There's not just tens of millions. There's not just millions. There's not tens of thousands of us. There's not thousands of us. There's not hundreds of us. There's not 8 of us, or 4 of us, or 2 of us. But in the past, all those numbers were true. And that can be proved mathematically. And if you don't realize that, again, you're incapable of thought. You're not rational. So you have to accept what I say if it's rational. Men will kill each other over their ability to assert this authority, which I assert because you have to. This is what science is for. It's to get answers. Well, what's the answer we want? When did we begin? Right? You have to use rational logic or you're just guessing. The gods spawned us. Or we came, every Native American, South and North American, every native tribe of every continent has come up with some idea to answer this question. And nobody deals with this better in a more entertaining form than Tom Wolfe in his immortal book, which you must read, although I know you won't because I'm telling you to do it. Tom Wolfe's last book, the man who wrote The Right Stuff and the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, landmarks in American literature. And his last book was on science. It was on Darwinism. And he talks about this right at the beginning of the book, is what are the other theories of the origin of the human race? It was from a bug. It was from a bird. It was from a snake. It was from the gods copulating and just dropping us here like eggs. It just a million different theories. Why? Because those men were incapable of thinking clearly. So why would men just make something up? Because you have to. Because you have to answer that question. You have to. Or you're not a man. You have to answer that question. Where are we from? If you can't answer that question and get it right, You're not a scientist. You're not even a human. You have to know that. Do you? Where are humans from? Let's be more specific. When did we originate in the past? When? When on a timeline going into the past did humans emerge on Earth? You could say, how did we get here? You could say, where were we? It had to be some position on the Earth. Were we dropped from the sky? Did Daniken's chariots of the gods arrive here and just pound us together and then they left? Is that right? You have to answer. You have to! Or everything you do is futile. And you are possibly and probably dangerous. Because other men are trying to figure this out. We have to know. We have to know to the best of our ability. Well, in the past, we had no ability to know that. So men who made things up, you might say, called a myth, which is not necessarily false, but it's your tribal or regional or national or just familial idea of where we're from. So you'll be able to tell the children, because they're going to want to know, honey. It's inescapable. Mommy, daddy, guru, priest, medicine man, where did I come from? Where did this come from? Because a child will eventually be able to use its rational logical system, and we all go through this. You start to think, gee, what was it like 1,000 years ago? You read the history books. What was it like 5,000 years ago? Well, how far back does that go? Do you know anything about that? You've probably heard stories, and probably a lot of it's true, I would guess. I went through the same thing. I read the history books. I was curious. The Egyptian culture, the Babylonian culture, the Sumerian culture, the ancient megalithic cultures all over Earth, which can't be explained at all. And no theory can account for the megalithic structure builders of God knows how long ago, but predates all written human records all over the world. You have Machu Picchu, you have the pyramids. The pyramids are the easiest to figure out because it's rather recent. But all over the world, every corner of the world, are gigantic multi-ton stone structures. That is, each stone was moved into position by cultures that lived, some of them are said to be 10,000 years ago. Well, how far back can you go? Where did they come from? Can you answer that? Well, you can use rational logic to figure certain aspects out. We had to come from two humans. Yeah. No matter what your theory is, the geometric regression on 8 billion back through time comes back to two humans, a male and a female. Where did they come from? If you believe the second theory of Darwin, and again, you must read Tom Wolfe's book, The Kingdom of Speech. The Kingdom of Speech. There's a reason for that title, which is extraordinarily profound. I consider it to be the most necessary book to read. It's like the Bible. If you don't read that book, you don't know anything. You're helpless. You won't understand anything someone like myself says because he'll just be confused. But if you read Tom Wolfe's book, you will not be confused for the rest. You will know where Darwinism comes from and why it's wrong. So what's the replacement theory? Wikipedia points this out, and I had to look this up twice because I fundamentally disagree with this, but de facto it's the case that if there is a false theory, a false model, such as natural selection, certainly for humans, I'm only talking about humans here. I'll get back to the animal and plant kingdom. Because the finches did speciate. They certainly did. But did humans speciate out of the ecology? No. No, we didn't. So you have to answer the question, where did we come from? Where did humans come from? Do you understand why that is so critical to answer first? Because otherwise you don't know what you're doing. and you actually don't know what you're saying. You're communicating whatever comes into your goddamn mind. Unless you can answer the question, where are humans from? The reason you have to answer that is because otherwise you don't know where humans are going. We're not speciating now, and neither are the plants and animals, and they haven't speciated for it, certainly not in the past 10,000 years. There's no evidence of speciation in human time. In other words, it stopped. But where do humans come from? Wikipedia says that when a model is proved false, which is what happened at the discovery of DNA, that's the end of Darwinism for humans. It doesn't work for humans. How do we know that? Read Tom Wolfe's book. It would take too long. I'm tempted to just assert it, but you see, that's not scientific. You have to be able to prove it to yourself. Otherwise, you're just believing me, which is just as stupid as believing the Pope or believing Bernardo Kastrup or believing anybody. You just believe. Well, you're not using your mind when you do that. You have to use your mind. And you have to answer the question, where are we going? That's what it means to ask the question, who are we? You're asking the question, what's this all for? What's the conclusion? Can we envision the future at all? Well, you may not want to do that right at this moment. It doesn't look good. Ever since the discovery of the so-called hydrogen bomb, the fusion bomb, the two-stage bomb that uses an atomic explosion, that is a fission explosion, just to trigger the fusion explosion, 1,000 times more powerful than the bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Those were only 15 kilotons. A hydrogen bomb, an H-bomb as they were called when I was growing up, is 1,000 times more powerful. And I've given several video presentations on the Tsar Bomba, which was exploded in 1961 over Nova Zemlya. And the Nazi scientists that were captured by the Soviets and the Americans on both sides of the Atlantic literally shit in their pants. Or as the British would say, they shit themselves. And the whole thermonuclear thing was called off. Because the big godfather, whatever that is, just said, no, we can't do that. Because that bomb had been dumbed down at the last second. It went off at between 50 and 60 megatons. By far the largest explosion ever made by humankind. It was over Nova Zemlya near the Arctic Circle in 1961, October of 1961, when I was 7 years old. And it almost wiped out half of Northern Europe from that distance. Because it was dumbed down at the last second, it was supposed to have had uranium core. But Sakharov and the other scientists, toward the end of the construction process, the engineering process, when they were getting ready to detonate it, to fly it over Nova Zemlya, drop it, and watch it explode, they said, we have to take out the uranium core and replace it with lead. And that was approved at the last second. So the lead was put in there. It went off between 50 and 60 megatons. But if it had been uranium core, it would have been close to spec, about 100 megatons. Nobody knew exactly what that would do. But if it had had uranium core instead of lead, it would have gone off at about 100 megatons. It was projected. But if it had, it would have wiped out half of Northern Europe from the distance of the Arctic Circle. So mankind still has that weapon. The United States has it. Russia has it. They still have it. Everybody knows how to build it now. So we could wipe out the entire Earth in one day. Wipe it out completely. No life left. Yeah, maybe within a week, it'd be over. One of those things going off would destroy the earth. Eventually. It would make life unlivable. But if there were more than one that went off, which is entirely possible at any second, including right now, that would be it. So that doomsday device exists. That was the basis of Stanley Kubrick's movie Dr. Strangelove, with Peter Sellers playing the role of 5 different men in that movie. Quite a classic. It came out right after the Tsar Bomba was exploded. The doomsday device. It exists. So where are we going? How come that's happening? Can you answer that? You'd better. Is any man capable of answering that question? Why are we ready to destroy ourselves, and what should we have done instead? What was this all for? Can any man possibly address that question? That's the only question worth answering. But in order to answer it, I can prove, and it's actually obvious, you have to know where we're from. You have to know when. First of all, when. When did the first 2 humans appear on Earth? Well, I think you know where this goes. Wikipedia, to complete that statement that I made earlier, says that if there is a model that has been falsified, in this case it would be the natural selection, speciation, origin of man. If that's disproved, then in order to dethrone the false model, which is the speciation of man, which did not happen, you have to have another model. There is none. Not a rational one. Let's pause right there. Is there a rational model for the origin of the human race? That's the question. Because if you don't answer that question, you can't possibly answer what this is for. Why are you alive? Why do you have consciousness? Why are there 8 billion people with consciousnesses? What the hell is going on? That is science. That's what we need to know. Does anybody know? Well, you have to use rational logic, or you can't convince a rational man. That's why there are so many atheists now. They're sick and tired of being told by some religious nutcase that it all came from divine fiat. So that's right out. Well, is it? Is it really? If you don't know, if nobody knows, if there's no rational answer, then it's a free-for-all. You can say anything. But whatever you say, you'd better be able to prove it. That's science. That's actually rational logic. So to answer the question, when did the first 2 humans appear on Earth? The same question comes up if it's speciation. Well, when were the first 2 humans that speciated out of whatever was before the human genome? There had to be a male and a female that conjugated, and that's where the binary explosion begins. When was that? It was at least, and here you have to go back through human record, or you could check the paleontological record of fossil humans. That's been done. But what were the conclusions? We can figure out from human records how far back human records go. We can correlate it, for instance, with the pyramids, which had to be in a certain location. So when you're asking when did the 2 humans first appear, you're also specifying where. Was it in Gondwana land? Was it on Pangaea? Was it in Australia? Was it in Africa? Was it in the Middle East? Was it in North America, South America? Where were the first 2 humans and when? How long ago And where were they? You can actually get a huge amount of information from the 4 types of human phenotype. There are the whites, the 15%. They all live in the extreme northern latitudes. None of them live in south of the equator. They do now. But going back, well, say just 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, you go back 4,000 years, that would be 2000 BC, we would say. Where were humans then, and what did they look like? The whites were all in Europe and Russia. The blacks were all in Africa and Australia. So the black people are south of the equator, and the white people are north of the equator. That's only 30%. The 70% that are brown are in between, and that's absolute. There is no overlap. The whites live above about 30 degrees latitude north. They're all in Europe and Russia. All the whites are. None of them are in North and South America. None of them are in Africa. None of them are in India. None of them are in Iran. None of them are in Israel. None of them are in China. They're in Russia, Finland, Sweden, and you can name the rest. Down to about Italy and Greece and Spain. In other words, Europe and Russia. That's where 15% of the phenotype is. White people. 15% who are black live exclusively in Africa and Australia. It also goes out to Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. And that's where it ends. They're all in the southern hemisphere. All of them. All of them are. But the brown people, who are not white, they're darker. They're brown people. They're not black, they're lighter. And that's 70% of all people are in the mid-latitude just north of the equator. Exclusively. And in China, which is the 4th group, the Orientals, the largest group are the Orientals. Of all the brown people, the Chinese far outweigh the other brown people, which is quite interesting. And it was from that side of the Himalaya mountains that we have, I believe, correctly deduced that the brown people went across into North America and from there went into South America. And that's why all the people in North and South America are not white and they're not black. They're brown. But that was later. And that's known. That's actually known. So where and when did man originate? It was less than 10,000 years ago, somewhere on the Iranian plateau. That's where people come from. Is the best theory, according to what Wikipedia demands. If the origin theory of the human race has been disproved, which it has, then you have to have a better theory. This is the better theory. We come from the Iranian plateau 10,000 years ago. What happened? We did not descend from the ecology. So how did those first 2 humans get to Ararat? How did the first 2 humans end up at Ararat, just above the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, where civilization began and spread out from there? That is where we come from and when. So how did those first 2 humans get there? That is recorded by a man who lived before the ecocidal flood. And that can be proved. I proved it. I follow all the steps. I do it correctly. Where are we from? So that we know where we're going. And that's recorded in the book of Enoch. On which book I am the world's foremost expert. If you don't listen to me, you're lost. And that is the dictate of science. I do not make the rules, but I sure as fuck follow them. I don't care if you're allergic to God. You're going to pay attention to the evidence that can be proved. And whatever you do after that, you can shove up your ass for all I care, but you are going to listen to me or you're going to be wrong. 'Cause I'm right. That's how it works in science. Thank you so much for your patience in listening to this rather extraordinary discourse. I will be extrapolating on that without raising my voice in the next few videos, as I have been threatening to do for over a year. But I did want to complete the series on the geometry that I discovered that unlocks physics. So you're going to see these videos mixed for a little while longer. But I swore, and I am not going to relent. Eventually, I will only be talking about the Holy Scriptures of the earth. The Quran, the testimony of Yeshua, the testimony of the Israeli prophets, and the common source for all of those. And I will cover the I Ching, which is a holy book, and I will debunk the myth of the Buddha and Hinduism, and all religions that don't conform to monotheism, because it's a scientific principle that for this ecology to exist at all, it was designed by a superconsciousness. And if you don't accept that, I am forced to tell you under orders of heaven, you are going to go to hell. So I'm your last hope to keep you out of hell. If you don't listen to me, that's where you're going. Thank you very much. Keep looking up. There's about a half moon. It's beautiful. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.